Hello, everyone, and welcome to Ask Me Anything about Social Entrepreneurship. In 2017, the University of Calgary implemented an Indigenous engagement strategy for the journey to reconciliation. One aspect of that includes a land acknowledgement. Thus, I would like to take this opportunity to acknowledge that I am joining this virtual event from the traditional territories of the people of the Treaty 7 region in southern Alberta. The City of Calgary is also home to Métis Nation of Alberta Region 3. I'd also like to acknowledge that some of our speakers today are joining us from Edmonton, which is in Treaty 6 territory. Together with you, the participants at today's event, we acknowledge and respect the relationships and rights of Indigenous peoples around the world to their traditional lands, territories, waters, coastal seas, and resources, as described in the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. We have attendees from many places today, so if a land acknowledgement is something you do in your home country, we invite you to share one from your region in the chat. If this is a practice that's new to you, we challenge you to take some time to learn more about the traditional keepers of the land where you are from. I'll include a link in the chat to show you how to do that. It's called nativeland.ca. My name is Alia Gina, and I am the moderator for today's session. I work at the Trico Foundation Social Entrepreneurship Center at the Haskayne School of Business. Since today is an interactive session, we encourage you to turn on your camera. We are also recording this session for future reference and to share on our website because if you have some questions, we think other people might as well. Ask Me Anything about Social Entrepreneurship, which we fondly refer to as a maze, is a collaboration between the organizations represented by our panelists, namely the Trico Charitable Foundation, ABC, Innovate Calgary, and Social Enterprise Fund, as well as the Haskayne School of Business. We're thrilled that you're joining us here today. This is a series of sessions that we've launched and we've been doing a few times now, but we're here to listen to our community and we're here to learn how we can help you. Thus, we need your support and questions to make these sections a success. As a reminder, though the panel represents many years of experience with social enterprise and in the ecosystem, we want to remind you that this is not legal advice. So without further ado, allow me to introduce our panelists. First, we have Jordana Armstrong, if you want to wave, she's a director at Innovate Calgary. Then we have Jane Bisbee, Executive Director at the Social Enterprise Fund. We also have with us Brittany Kerluke and Dan Overall from the Trico Charitable Foundation. And Christine Spottiswoode will be joining us shortly. She is from the Alberta Social Economy Ecosystem Development. So as I've just said, we're doing an Ask Me Anything session. So is there anyone in the audience that would like to kick us off with the first question? Please either unmute yourself or raise a hand and I will call on you. The chat is also open as other questions arise. So please, we encourage you to keep the conversation going and share resources with each other. The chat is open for you to use and to learn from each other. All right, with that, any first questions? Oh, Clayton.
Yes, he gets a prize.
Welcome,
Hi.
Clayton. Ask your question.
Hi. My name is Clayton Rudy with Bike Winnipeg. I'm wondering about resources to predict outcomes, to, I guess, proactively calculate outcomes for various programs or activities.
Can I ask a question? What kind of outcomes are you talking about?
Okay, so specifically, we're working on a bike share system, and we're trying to predict what various types of outcomes are, such as like climate impact or impact on public health, things like that.
Anybody want to jump into this from the panel?
Jordana, go for it.
Well, I was going to say, Jane, you're already speaking, but I
mean, it's mission outcomes that you're trying to grapple with. Is that right?
I suppose, but it's especially in the context of like the potential for like outcomes purchase agreements or CDOCs or those types of more,
So business analysis.
yeah, like I suppose they're more difficult funding mechanisms than conventional financing.
Okay, there's several different kinds of questions in there. There's always the interesting challenge of mission outcomes and how do you track that. But if you're talking about how do you figure out inside your business what your revenue streams are going to be, for example, how much money you're going to earn, is that what you're trying to get at?
No, not revenue, outcomes. Like we're trying to like the social outcomes.
Oh, right. You talked,
of a bike share system.
A lot of technical research, I would guess, on the climate side to start with. Here's the challenge with social entrepreneurship and the mission side, at least measuring impact and mission, is that there are all kinds of different ways to do it, and not all of them are particularly efficient. So how many people are you keeping out of cars, I guess, would be part of the equation. Just all that kind of work around what it is that you're changing. How are you moving the needle with the mission? And then you have to start diving into the research that's available that coordinates with that corresponds to that.
Yeah, I guess it's a little tricky because there's some features that don't exist in other bike shares. So for example, cargo bike shares, we don't see any cargo bike shares in North America. So the research, it's difficult to predict what the outcomes will be when we're trying to, approach different organizations and municipalities about what, the outcomes that we're expecting or that we're hoping to deliver.
Jordana's got her hand, go for it.
I have another question in a different direction, Clayton. I'm curious. So it sounds like, have you been doing this for a while?
Yeah, some amount of time. Yeah.
Okay, because I'm curious about when you say an outcomes purchase agreement, like some sort of version of a social impact bond. And in that case, I would recommend, and this is just with my experience with one organization here in Alberta, trying to raise a social impact bond, and then the research that we've done, like secondary research in other markets like the UK, I would have very strong demonstrated outcomes yourself before using that type of financial instrument, because, and Jane always talks about this, there are kind of traditional instruments that we already use to access money. It could be debt, could be grants, and those can be used differently if you're proving out your impact model already. If you're certain of, and Jane's going to jump in, I'm just going to finish that thought. If you don't have a demonstrated track record of your existing outcomes, I'd be interested in why you're pursuing that type of financing mechanism, because I think you're creating a lot of risk, and you're also creating transaction costs that might not necessarily need to be there. We'd have to dig into the details of that, of the reason why you're pursuing that particular mechanism, and sort of who's paying, who the actors are, and then just supporting Jane's perspective there around like the secondary research that you might be able to do. If there are kind of university actors that you might be able to partner with, if you think that there are sort of unique measures that you want to start to look at and predict, there could be sort of folks that you can partner with to do more substantive lit reviews and that kind of thing. But that would just be a curiosity / like potential risk I would think about in terms of how you're raising that capital.
And I'm going to follow something, Jordana, that you've raised, because as I think about it, the biggest question is who you're measuring for and why. What do they want to know? Some, from the point of view of an investor, some investors are going to be interested in one aspect, others are going to be interested in another. you probably should work with them to find out why they want to know what they want to know. And then that can give you an idea about where it's useful spending your time creating measurement systems. So yes, you want some for yourself because you want to know why you're doing this. You want to be able to tell, whether you're being successful in delivering your mission. But I think it's really important to look at what the investors are trying to accomplish. If you're dealing this from the financial point of view, or if you're trying to fulfill a contract obligation for a financing partner of some sort, talk to them really carefully about what they want and why they want it, and what they're trying to change, and see whether you can measure up.
Yeah. I've started approaching a few, and it seems that some don't quite know exactly like a hard specific outcome that they themselves want.
Yeah.
Some they're sometimes clear on their mission and they have existing programs, but if we're trying to focus on like an outcomes purchase agreement for a specific outcome, like that's not already, like funders often don't have that set up already.
Yeah, they haven't really.
It's almost like we have to create these are the outcomes, which are you interested in almost?
Something that we do, and then I'll shut up, is that we actually talk to the clients and say, what are you measuring?
Exactly.
What is it? What's your success indicators? Someone's mentioned KPIs. So what is it that you are trying to accomplish? Also, what are you counting for other people? What are you tracking for other organizations, other funders? And then we see whether or not we can do that, because I don't want to lay a whole lot of extra tracking and counting and measuring on people, because that's expensive to do and challenging. So I'll stop there.
And Clayton, this is probably not as much, may not be a comment for you because you've been doing this for a while, but might be more relevant to other folks in the room. I was going to say the exact same thing. Jane beats me to the punch every time, but a different lens on that around, I would start with what you're already measuring. For folks in the room who might not have measurement strategies, like something like a theory of change is a useful starting tool. It's not a perfect tool. And from there, you can start to build out indicators that align to your intended impact. What have you been tracking as an organization? And then it sounds to me like there are potentially things like carbon offsets that you're thinking about with respect to pieces that you might be measuring. Those are maybe more technical pieces where I think you could start to engage kind of third parties to think about that and look at other kind of comparable industries or comparable types of deals, but or types of organizations creating impact. But I would start with the foundations of what have you historically been measuring, because you're going to have some risk in getting outside of that if you're in an outcomes purchase agreement. So proxying kind of from there.
And I just want to add, I think like ultimately a lot of what we've talked about is really coming down to what your why is and what you want to achieve as an organization, because there's going to be a whole smorgasbord of potential groups that you could go talk to about maybe funding or what they're looking for. But is that really true to what you want to achieve? And it can get really overwhelming. It's the same as not every customer is the right customer. Not every funder is the right funder. And so really sort of figuring out like that foundational piece of what we want to do and what we want to measure, because some of them might be too big. If all of a sudden it gets into like carbon capture and all these things, that might not be where you want to focus your time. That's for you to own your own journey and make that decision for yourself. And I think that's a really key piece to the work that you're doing is always keeping that why in mind. And then you want to try to find supporters who have that aligned why with you.
Yeah, just to build on Brittany's point, the way I break it down is, number one, it's what you really want, which is your why that Brittany just talked about. Then it's what the people you really care about want in terms of your bike share. And then at Trico, we're big believers in learning from others and kind of expanding the circle that you can learn from. So if you're finding that there's no bike shares in North America that are doing what you're looking guidance for or inspiration from, expand it to looking at bike shares in Europe. And if you can't find bike shares in Europe that are doing the kind of things that you want to learn from, look at analogous industries, right? Like the ability to fast track your journey from looking at either other bike shares around the world or analogous industries is really, really powerful. So it's strongly recommended that you consider that.
Okay, thanks.
Any follow-up questions, Clayton?
Not really. Just to make a comment though, like a social impact bond isn't necessarily what we're aiming to pursue. Just because usually that's something that's offered and that we have to conform to. It's not something that we have to offer. It's something that's offered, to the sector, to industry. So.
Great question, though. Thanks for that.
Thanks.
Thanks so much for asking. Next, we have, I think it's Anka, but it could be Ansa. So please ask us your question.
Hi, it's Aika, like Paul Aika.
Oh, Anka. Okay.
So
thank
nice
you.
to talk to you, Leah, in person.
Yes, you too.
And I'm sorry, I'm dealing with some health issues. So I'm just starting out. So I've known about social enterprises. I'm from Europe, and we're very much aware of how the effect is on environment and such. And so we're building our app it's a single parents app, and the concept of the entire system will be a social enterprise whereby giving back to community a percentage of our income to non-profit. Now we're just starting out. Where would I reach out to find out more about how to develop our business as that? We are for profit, but eventually in the future we'll be building a foundation as well. What advice could you provide?
Just talk a bit. It really depends on sort of like what type of support that you're looking for. So you can always send an email out, maybe to Alia, and then she can send it out to the group. But it depends on what you're looking for. And I think that the piece is, and one of the pieces that we talk about, so we have a program called Assess, which is all about sort of looking at organizations about where they're at and then sort of where they could be. So we talk about it as a mountain. So maybe where you are today isn't where you're going to end up, and also different ways that organizations can have impact. And so it sounds like you're kind of on that journey of sort of saying, here's where we are. We've got this vision for the future, but now how do we sort of get it into motion? And so one of the pieces that we work with organizations a lot about is, how do you test and learn along the way? You're talking about an app, you're talking about technology, that can get expensive really fast, right? And so how are you going to be able to learn and build it as you go is a key piece. So specifically, it just depends on what types of supports you're looking for. Is there anything you're specifically know you need as a next step right now?
So we're just, it was supposed to be live in August, but we're actually working on it. Hopefully we'll be up live here by April, May. And so we have a community of over 500 people waiting that we're building. So we have to build the clients online, like the B2C, and then we're adding the B2B. So, but the ultimate goal of the business is a social enterprise. Like that's what we're building it as. Because it is going back to community. No matter what we do, that's the intent. And I have a thing I can share with you folks, but wanted to know more about what makes a social enterprise and what are the steps. Are there steps? I think what you're describing is, yeah, definitely where we're at, but also where we want to be. And our vision is like global domination in 5 years. Like there's nothing like it in North America. We're new to market, but there is something in Europe. And it's about society. It's about helping humanity. It's not just about mental health for single parents. It's many aspects of what we want to be doing to improve society, so that single parents don't feel alone in their journey.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and in Canada, there's no specific designation for social enterprise legally, right? So I think when a lot of people ask, like, how do I become a social enterprise? They're talking about the legal piece. For Trico, the core is that the social mission is key to the product or service that you're selling, what you're offering in the market, is really looking at closing gaps in society and moving the conversation forward. And so, yeah, I don't know, just sort of based on what you're saying is like what your next step is in terms of what makes me a social enterprise. I think if the mission's core to what you're doing, then that's key. Jane's going to jump in. So
Yeah. Well, just to follow on from what you were talking about, it's when I listen to you, it sounds to me like there's sort of two levels of questions going on here. It sounds like you already are a social enterprise as far as I would consider, because it's about mission and it's about how you work in community, right? So, and you asked about what resources are there available to you. And I think Brittany's right. There's the whole piece, there's all the tech questions around your product itself. And that's kind of one basket of things. And then there's a whole set of questions that I think I hear about how to operate a business, right? And how do you run an organization and best practices around business. Luckily, there are lots of different kinds of resources available in the province. Some of them specifically aimed at social enterprise, like the assess tool that Trico has, which even though you're setting up as a nonprofit, as a for-profit, I'd go and look at it anyway. But even the sort of all the different incubators that are working in business, this is what I think is interesting about social enterprise. Most of the social entrepreneurs have got a foot in both worlds, right? And so in some cases, incubators that are supporting development of technology specifically, and Jordana would know about this, and I see Dave Cree from Platform in here too. There are a whole bunch of incubators and support systems around that. And then there are specific ones for social entrepreneurs. So the Alberta Social Economy Ecosystem Development Organization, go on their site and take a look at who are the organizations that are dealing with that. So you've got a whole lot of stuff going on. We could spend all this entire session probably doing an analysis of what you're doing, which could be fun. But I think you've got, to me, it sounds like you've got two sets of questions. One's about how do I build a structure that will carry this mission that I want to deliver and this product that I need to deliver. And I would imagine that you should probably go and be talking to Jordana too around the whole tech piece and who can help you on that. So I'll stop there. But to me, it seems that I would kind of disentangle your thought processes and be really intentional about what answer you're trying to get on which question that you're dealing with.
Thank you. I think my focus is around, sorry, can you hear me? Sorry, I had to mute you because I was coughing. My question is more around making sure that what we're building is, I'm a very structured person, I'm very organized. And so I want to make sure that what we're building is ahead of when it comes, we're with it. Does that make sense? So it is to do with our mission, our business mission, but also to move quickly, that when we have everything up and ready and we have the 1,000, 5,000, 10,000 users, we want to make sure that we're giving back to community from inception of revenue, from revenue growth. Does that make sense what I'm saying?
Well, yes and no. If you're talking about building your business so that it's able to respond to a sharp growth in customers, that's one question. If you're talking about building the application and the technology,
No,
I mean,
that's
those
not
are
what I'm
both
talking
really,
about.
okay. You're talking about building the business itself.
I'm not talking about the app. We already have that.
Okay.
The
Yeah,
design,
so
the ops.
Yeah, you're talking about, so I mean, it's all the same questions that any small business has, right? Being a social enterprise doesn't change the answers to those questions at their core. You still have to have best business practice. You might have interesting challenges to your best business practices because of your mission. Your mission may add layers of complexity onto how you address any particular business question. So that's where I think a variety of inputs in how you develop your business would be something that you would want to be open to. It's not about, there is no perfect system out there. You need to find and build the right kind of structure that suits what you need to do, if that makes sense.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thanks, Aika. Great question. Looking forward to what your app looks like and how we can support along your journey.
Thank you.
Now we'll go over to John. Please, if you want to come off mute, thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks so much. I had a few kind of general questions, but I think I'll start with something a little more specific. It's geared towards Innovate Calgary, but it is relatively universal in this context. I just kind of wanted to know, when it comes to projects with Innovate, what is your kind of overall mix of students versus graduates? And what are the advantages or disadvantages of both? Where if someone were to choose to engage with an innovator as a student or as a graduate, what would be a good pathway to take?
And John, in clarification, are you asking, we're always clarifying, right? It's hard to just answer, especially in a dialogue forum. It's also a facilitation trick to get folks talking more. So just point of clarity, though, I was kind of joking in the last point. Are you talking about as an individual engaging with an innovator on campus, or themselves being an innovator looking to like access programs and services and wondering sort of where there might be more support?
I think more the latter, where like if you were in the position of something is going to happen with an innovator and you have to decide if you want to approach it retaining your student status or if you want to be a graduate, it seems as though the student status has a lot of advantages, but also the graduate does as well, because there's time constraints involved with being a student. And I just kind of wanted to get your take on it.
For sure. And we can definitely take that offline to talk about details if there are specifics, because I do think that's context specific. I have seen cases where students have extended their graduation date to participate in a particular program because there were some programs on campus will only allow you to participate because you're paid through scholarship. And so you have to have that, like you have to have an active UC ID in order to participate. And many are moving towards like not requiring that. So co-curricular learning is becoming increasingly popular. Hunter Hub offers a lot of great programming. Much of the programming that we offer is for graduates, alumni, and non UCalgary folks as well. So it is very context specific, and you would have to balance out paying the fees of that semester with whatever the benefit you are going to receive from that particular opportunity. I think Alia would actually have something probably more to say than I do on that.
Yeah, I guess we have a few programs and then we kind of triage back out because we get to hear about a lot of things on campus, off campus. So let's see how we can help you and have a conversation around that so that we can get you more involved as you want to be.
Yeah, that's exciting. There just seems to be so many opportunities where it's quite difficult to decide and take that first step and decide, oh, this is my path.
Right. I think someone said that a little bit earlier, though. It's not dissimilar to the first question around impact measurement, but really starting with your why, right? And so for different people, that answer is going to look quite differently, but weighing out the pros and cons around your why. And then the other question is sort of what's the best next step? Because sometimes it's quite daunting when we think about that, the sort of the massive opportunities and amount of change we want to make, but what's that sort of best next step? And then thinking about that student status in that context.
Yeah, so make sure to connect with us, John, offline, and then we can take it further. And then you said you may have additional questions?
I thought it would inspire additional ones, but this one is kind of an offshoot. Maybe I could ask it because it is just about incubators in general. Have you seen examples of people taking kind of a social enterprise with a research background and building it into a thesis or a PhD? Does that happen often? Is that a viable path, or does it hit a number of blocks along the way where often funders say like, you should focus on this, not the PhD and things of that nature?
That depends on the supervisor. Jane was going to say something. You'd have to have the right supervisor who wants, because supervisors have a lot, I'm being recorded, have a lot of influence around the research of the folks that they are working with. And there, you know, the exceptions, of course, to that, but finding the right person to work with. But yes, we've seen some of the innovators I love working with most are either, well, postdocs or PhD students, because they have this sort of freedom to explore. They have, you know, a little bit, you know, they have a little bit of security in their roles, but they also are really directly interested in knowledge translation as it relates to their research. And so if that's a path you're interested in pursuing, I think the University of Calgary in particular has a welcoming environment for that. Steve Larder, the Associate VP Innovation, is really excited about this idea of innovation postdocs. Like there's a kind of a movement around that. And then I know the other academic institutions around town are also very excited about social enterprise, and there's a lot of activity at all of those institutions. So I think safe to say that that's sort of increasingly welcome, but you have to work with the right supervisor in that respect. Jane.
Yeah, I'm the person on the panel who knows the least about the academic world, so I'm of no help to you that way. But I will tell you that I have been interviewed by more PhD and MA students working on thesis. So there's lots of interest out there all across the country, all across the continent, and around the world. So that's I find encouraging that there's more and more study and more interest around that. So my 2 cents.
This is going to be boring. I've got to plug one more thing. I would encourage you to go that route, because I think there is a huge opportunity with the concept of academic freedom. And I think there's just a really awesome opportunity to start to explore that sort of thinker, doer, academic practitioner. I think there's a lot of synergy between those two worlds, but they're often treated as very much, you know, knowledge creation, then dissemination. And the more people that blend that, I think the better off we'll be.
That's wonderful. Very exciting. Thank you all so much.
Looking forward to chatting with you more, John. Thank you for the questions, I should say. Now we'll go over to Kristen, who put her question in the chat, but I think there's a little more context. So please, over to you.
Hi, everyone. So my name is Kristen, and I'm joining from the unceded ancestral homeland of the Beothuk and Mi'kmaq, also known as the island of Newfoundland. And I'm a Master's of Business Administration and Social Enterprise and Entrepreneurship student at Memorial University of Newfoundland. And some of my classmates and my professor here as well. And before I ask my question, I just wanted to make a comment because John's question was very relevant to me. So I joined the program that I'm in now because, well, one of the many reasons is there's an internship, and it's definitely has that freedom where we can kind of make it our own. So what I'm doing is a little bit like a thesis. It's like a research type project, and it's about the incubator cooperative space. So, you know, if you want to chat, I'll put my email in the chat. But, you know, that was definitely a difficult decision to make. But I think in the long run, I'm getting this like great marriage of like practical but like academic experience. So if you wanted to chat. So my question was originally around, I guess I'd like to hear what everyone's opinions are on if you see kind of a shift happening in the financial space, particularly for managers in social purpose organizations like social enterprises. Do you see there being a shift coming, or maybe we're in the middle of one and we don't even know it? You know, just wanted to get your thoughts on kind of the overall landscape of finance right now in the realm.
So can I ask a clarifying question? Just
Sure.
so I am following. You're talking about inside of social purpose organizations, their own internal financial management skill set.
Yes.
I wish it was even stronger than it is. Yes, there are people starting to understand that is a skill set that you absolutely need. I will say that to me, that's the best part about social entrepreneurship is that it says to people who want to change the world, okay, you've got a great mission, you've got a great thing you want to do. How do we teach you all of the skill sets and all the secret handshakes and all of the stuff that you need to know that they teach those people up in MBA school, right? How do you, instead of fumbling along and saying, yeah, but we're trying to do the right thing, how do we provide the secrets of all best practices around business and put them and put them into changing that mission? So to me, that's the biggest opportunity and the biggest promise around social enterprise and social entrepreneurship. Those who've heard me before know that I don't think about it as a noun anymore. I think about it as a verb, as a way of doing things and a way of being inside of an organization. So I live in hope that there are more good financial managers, but it's the same as any small business. It's a challenge to find and be able to afford to have that dedicated staff expertise internally, and to even understand what that can mean to your organization. So I live in hope, and I think we will get there. But it's like anything, it's a bit of a ways out.
And I just want to add, I think it's been an interesting shift. Like, I've worked in the space for 10 years, and I'm seeing a lot more people coming to us with maybe like a business development title or a director of social enterprise or something like that. Whereas we used to get as a foundation, so we do grants with charitable organizations, we would see a lot of fund developers, right? And so now we're seeing a few more sort of people who are really directed into that sort of the business activities. And the thing is that you have this place where you need to be able to balance the business activities things and the social things, right? There's going to be tension between the two. And so I think anybody going into that type of role as well is understanding, how do you work with an organization that is balancing these two, and how do you get them as working together as well as they possibly can, which is a big conversation. The other thing is that ultimately, there's a lot of aspects that you're going to do as a social enterprise that are similar to what people are already doing in these organizations. So you have to understand the business aspects, the costs that go into that business, but people already need to understand that in terms of their programs and have a number of those skills. So that's not to say that people who are already in those industries don't have those financial skills, because it's just with a little bit of a different lens, maybe a different customer. And so I think that there's a lot of amazing skills within there. I am seeing a bit of a shift in language and in roles, more so than I saw even 5 years ago. I'm seeing a lot more people that are coming to me that are holding sort of the business development roles than the sort of fund developer roles. But that's not to say that a fund developer wouldn't be an amazing asset to an organization that's looking at social entrepreneurship. So it's not always comes down to the title, right? But I have noticed that little bit of a shift. But I think like ultimately it's like they need someone in their organization that's going to help them balance the two worlds that they're kind of navigating. And the better you bring those aspects together, the less pressure points you're going to have at the end of the day.
That's really interesting. I just want to ask a follow-up question to that. I guess I never really thought about it like this before, looking at like charities I've seen, but finance and fund development are separate. And like, do you see that they're like, I guess the purpose of them being separate is like, yes, we need to treat, they do need to be treated, tad separately, just, inherently, but, if they are to like come together in the way that you say, like, what does that actually look like? Do you think, is that just working, closer together? Like what do you see that looking like?
God, I hate the word funding. I try to discipline people to think of financing and revenue streams. It's almost a semantics exercise to challenge your thinking. Can you think differently about it? And I think Brittany's right. The names are often the same sort of thing. I think that's a really fascinating observation around that the names of the people inside the operation are changing. Because if you can start to look at what you're doing as a charitable organization, as a not-for-profit, as a for-profit, around understanding revenue streams and how they come in and what they are and what money is and what it does, then that's what'll change this whole that's what'll change the economy, period. And we won't be siloing things quite so much anymore. We'll be understanding that everybody's got mission and everybody has a responsibility and a role inside a community, regardless of what their corporate structure is. That's very interesting.
Just building on that point, social entrepreneurship in certain models can be the only model where you can actually generate revenue while you're achieving impact. A lot of philanthropy and government, they're separate. So either you get the money before you do the good, or you get the money after. And that's one of the powerful things about social entrepreneurship, which is why there's this incentive of we need to get this right. Because again, those social entrepreneurship models are the only opportunity to do good while you're generating revenue that then you can reinvest to do even more good. But I just want to go back to your initial point, and I hope this doesn't take it too far afield. One of the challenges with social entrepreneurship is it's not one conversation, it's many conversations. And Jane is absolutely right in terms of being involved in the finance side of things. Yes, there is this conversation of how we need to bring additional business skills, acumen, to the finance portion of a social impact organization. But there's this also the conversation that Larry Fink kind of takes the lead on, of a lot of in the business community are realizing that doing good could actually maximize profits. And that's like nice, but the problem with it, as good as it is, and it is good, don't get me wrong, is it's still under sway of profit maximization. In addition to these two other conversations, we need this conversation where it's not profit maximization that drives motives, it's impact. And so if we could respect all three conversations, but shine a light on, I guarantee you there's nothing in the principles of business models or capitalism that says you have to maximize profit. So if we could just put on the table that you can actually be driven by maximizing impact rather than profit, like as long as you keep an eye on profit, you can be driven by impact. And empowering people who are interested in that type of dynamic, I think that could be actually one of the most powerful conversations we could have about the use of business models to solve social problems and the future of capitalism.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I think that really shines light on kind of the future of what, like, managing finances and, having people looking at money and in these types of organizations, that it's really shifting that mindset. And you need people that are really motivated by that. And yeah, I think that you're so right. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Kristen. You started a great conversation with our panel. So thanks. Next, we have a question from Michelle. So please, Michelle, join us from RAD.
Hi, yeah, I'm with RAD. I'm with Accessible Housing. We've been working on a nonprofit organization for probably a good 5 or 6 years now, where we help people make their homes more accessible. And our focus has been on low income clients. So we've been applying to United Way, a bunch of different organizations to help fund that. But with all of the less funding available these days, right? So we've decided to go into a social enterprise model as well, so that we can reach out to people who are higher income so that they can basically pay for the lower income. If that makes sense, we have programs for the, exactly, right? It's kind of the whole concept of what you were just talking about.
Correct.
So our challenge, we've done all of our market research, our fee structures are all figured out, but our problem now is how do we access and how do we get those clients? Is there a different innovative way for social enterprise industry to reach those clients? Like pull tabs don't necessarily work.
For sure. I'll just jump in because I was off mute already. I was going to say something in but as soon as I saw Dan come off mute on the last question, I was like, I cannot speak because I was waiting for this, was waiting for that moment, Dan, thank you. I would say, and it kind of links to Anka's question around like models. I think there are 3 major buckets that I have been thinking about when I have been thinking about a charity's ability to earn revenue. And this is really specific in the charity nonprofit context, sort of the business model. And that's what the question you have right now, the kind of governance and legal considerations. And then I've been thinking also a lot about culture and competency to actually execute on the business model. And so my curiosity would be, do you have the right folks at the table to actually practice entrepreneurship? And I said practice entrepreneurship. We've debated in the past in this very panel and other contexts, can entrepreneurship be learned, taught, etc. But starting at the very beginning of how you build a business, customer discovery, like who might pay for this? Who have you talked to understand who might be those viable customers? Platform offers amazing programming around customer discovery. Dave Cree's on the phone here today. There are other organizations that can support that. We run an internship program that helps early stage companies do some of that early validation when they're starting to figure it out and it's still on the side of their desks, which is a common problem. But that would be my question back to you. Do you have a sense of who those customers might be? Do you have assumptions about who they might be?
Well, there's definitely the assumptions just because everybody is getting older. So like there's a large market or a large pool of people that we could draw from. It's just with accessibility not really being on the forefront of many people who are in good health, good shape, that kind of thing. So it's just a matter of what's next? Like, how do we get to those people?
Correct. So in addition to some of the folks that I mentioned, I am a big fan of like the business model canvas and the literature around that as a starting point when you're at this very, very beginning of your journey, just as a quick and dirty tool with your team to sort of lay out some of the thinking around who those potential customers are, what that value proposition might be to them. And then I would be really trying to identify, is there someone on the team that has the time? Can you shave off some time and an experience or interest in learning around how to start to validate if those assumptions are correct? And that's the beginning, and the challenging part of the journey is starting to kind of prove out your model at the very early onset. And that just happens through practice. There's always like an older model of developing social enterprises, and folks on the call could probably speak to that. Let's hire a consultant to come in and tell us what the market opportunity is here. That works to some extent, but it's sort of limited in that you still need to actually start to test that product in the market with particular customers. Like I said, there are programs and resources that can walk you along that journey at the very early onset. And we can share some links in the chat as well, but I would be curious about that culture and competencies pillar and sort of how does that link to the business model implementation if you don't have a person who you can shave off some time to start to do some of that validation, then you're going to be looking for some alternative resources to get that done. Do you have to bring in additional funding specifically to do that? Can you work with a student? Is there a particular volunteer group that you can bring on? And there's a bunch of stuff that we could dig into around that, but it's that culture and competency to actually start to validate the business model is something I'm thinking about.
Yeah.
Jane?
Jordan, you're absolutely right. And Jordan has given some really good ideas about where you could go. I'm going to plant a little seed for you to just think about. When you say, how do we find customers? Well, who needs you? Right? Who needs your service? And you've identified an interesting idea around aging boomers in their home. Okay, then where do they gather? And the other question for you to work on your mind is, can they afford to pay the premium that you're thinking you want to charge them? Mm-hmm. They may well be able to. So it's a matter of and sometimes it's not as mysterious. It's okay, who's going to pay for this? Well, I guess then they're my customer. and how much are they willing to pay? And then how do I get them and keep them? Well, you provide the best damn service ever. You know, people talk about there's interesting conversations that going around about marketing as a social enterprise. And I have clients that have done it both ways. They market themselves. We're a social enterprise, so you should use us. Well, that's maybe good once to get them in the door of your coffee shop. But if you sell your crappy coffee, are they ever going to come back? So you've really got to be you've got to have a good, strong product. And it's really an exercise in thinking through whose pain am I solving, and will they be willing to pay me for that pain? And then where do they gather in groups? So how do you find the kind of people? Well, you know, you could start going down what organizations, what sorts of, where do they gather? Are there professional associations where these kinds of people gather together? Those kinds of things. And if you can narrow down and become focused on how do you reach them, the pieces of who your market is may start to fall into place. So, but there are lots of incubators and lots of organizations that can help you work through those processes. But you can even at home start to think through some of that, because that's essentially how they're going to guide you. And I'll bet Brittany goes through this all the time with people, so she may have some ideas.
Yeah, I mean, there's always the piece that you have very similar to any organization, is that not every customer is going to be the right customer at where you're at. And that's a really key thing, is you're not Pepsi, who has a ton of money just to throw marketing at everybody, right? And so figuring out that subgroup or that niche. And I think there's this really cool piece around crossing the chasm. And it's this idea of how customers adopt a new offering, right? Is that you kind of need to start small and have a group that's willing to test and learn with you. And these are called early adopters. So they're willing to kind of go through the hiccups and give you the feedback that you need so that you can learn, so that when you do bridge that gap and you go to sort of more general population, you've got those kinks worked out. And I cannot remember his name, and Dan is like knows it, but crossing the chasm is a really interesting sort of way to look at that, of, you know, how do we figure out those personality traits or those characteristics that we need from our customers. So who's willing to test and learn with us, so that we can get better at what we do, and we can make sure that this is a pressure point, and we can make sure that somebody can pay to solve that pressure point, before you sort of start looking bigger and bigger. And I think that community piece that Jane talked about is really key too. So if you determine what subgroup is going to help you test and learn, are there community partners that can help pair you up with those? Are those conversations that you can be having so that you really understand the pressure and the pain point that those organizations are having? So Dan, jump in, and I can't remember his name right now, or Jandana, whoever wants to jump in, and I can't, it's just not there.
It's Jeffrey Moore, I believe. But as well, again, big believer in learning from people who have been there, done that. So if you could speak to others who are doing some similar model to ask how they went through customer acquisition. In fact, on the Trico Foundation website, we had, I think it's the downtown Vancouver YWCA hotel, which won a social enterprise award, so half the hotel is for clientele who are economically disenfranchised, and the other half is, they picked like a kind of mid-market segment to go after. And they talk about their journey of how they did that. Now, I appreciate it's a hotel and you're not talking that, but you may find reading that case study quite interesting in terms of their evolution and how they did that. And they may even be an interesting contact for you as to getting some insights about customer acquisition and how they were able to balance those two things.
Okay, that's fantastic.
Jordana.
I know there are a lot of questions, but I just wanted to make one comment. And Michelle, I really appreciate that you're thinking about your services on a sliding scale. And so you're thinking about impact. So this comment isn't directly to your example, but I do want to just caution charities and nonprofits that are looking at sort of declining revenues in other places and then exploring social enterprise as a response to that. because there is a cost to running companies. And so it has to be very kind of strategically thought through, mission line, mission integrated. And in my view, I think it should be strengthening your impact. That's just my opinion. Take it or leave it. It sounds to me like you folks are having those kind of conversations, but I have seen way too many charities or nonprofits look at declining revenues on grants and then say, okay, we're going to start trying to manufacture honey and selling it at farmers markets without recognizing that there are a lot of folks who are already in that business or make, candle making or that kind of thing. Not to say that those things may not be aligned to your impact, they could be aligned, but just making sure there is that sort of strategic alignment to strengthen, because these things do, there's a lot of effort you can hear in this response in terms of validating those customers. So I just wanted to plug that for other folks on the call.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I'm going to look into some of those links that you guys sent me. That's fantastic. Thank you.
Such great conversation. Thanks, Michelle, for getting our panelists so fired up. I'm so happy to see this. Next, I'd like to call upon Chris, please, for your question.
Hi, I'm hiding away in the back. I have COVID here and just hiding the coughing fits. But I'm also one of the MBA students from St. John's here. And my question is kind of inspired by Kristens' question, and kind of tied to some of the technical business demands that are placed on social enterprises that want to be sustainable. And her example was finance. But, it extends to things like accounting and social impact, marketing, tech stuff, social media stuff. And I know Jordana had mentioned kind of consulting. What I was thinking about, and something we've spitballed as students, is like shared services models for social enterprises or nonprofits or anyone really in the social purpose sector to access these kind of technical services that you might be able to get by with, not on a daily basis, but on a kind of as needed basis. And I'm just wondering if anyone knows if it's been done successfully by an organization, and I kind of qualify success as able to reconcile the competing priorities and deliver responsive service to the clients.
We have money in an investment in a joint office situation where there's a whole bunch of nonprofits and charitable organizations in the same facility, and they do have some shared service options there, but it's very much how much do you need of a thing at what point. And it's like any small business might hire a particular professional service on contract only when they need them, and then you get to a point where that doesn't serve your needs anymore. So yes, it can work the same as it would work in any other part of the economy, or not, as the case may be about what it is you need internally. The thing that I think is interesting is to help a social purpose organization think through realistically what is the internal business structure it needs to be able to deliver services efficiently, and can it respond in the time of business. So can you get the answers you need with the structure and the staff that you have and the resources you have that will answer your questions as quickly as sometimes you need them answered. So yes and no, which is an entirely satisfactory answer to you, but it can work, absolutely, just like shared services can work anywhere.
Yeah, and I would add, like, we're hearing a lot more about those types of spaces. And I would say that the ones that I've seen successfully is they're, like Jane said, like an actual space where people are sharing. I've heard from a lot of organizations who aren't associated with the space and sort of saying like, I'm going to do IT for all nonprofits and charities. And I haven't heard much from them. So I don't know if things take time. So I don't know if they've not been successful or having a hard time finding their market of who those people are. I think the key is ultimately, if you're creating something to make somebody's life easier, make sure you really understand what's going to make their life easier, and make sure you understand what the challenges are that they're facing. Because there's no sense in you building something and nobody wants it, or you waste a bunch of your own time and money building something that doesn't suit the needs of the customers that you're trying to make their lives easier.
That's great. And I saw that someone had thrown something up in the chat there too. So I'll take a look at that. Thank you.
Yes, please do. Thanks, Chris, for your question. Next, we have Allison, please.
Hi, my question was in regards to the Social Enterprise Fund. Does this apply to only startups, or could an existing social enterprise apply? It's just back to that funding piece and knowing that there's many streams, but not all are considered equal for a social enterprise for profit.
We finance at any point in the growth of a social enterprise. So we've done flat dead startups right up to investing in senior organizations that have been around for decades. So, I mean, we try to approach this as a friendly banker of the kind that you perhaps can't come across somewhere else. So don't know whether that answers your question or whether there's a follow on.
It does. Thank you.
Thanks, Allison. It gives Jane a chance to give us some context because we don't always ask what she does. So thank you for asking that question. Next, over to Barry, please.
Yeah, I guess for the last 5 years, my wife and I have been trying to work out the challenge of aging in place. And I guess seeing a rapidly aging population, what we came up with after a lot of research is we looked at the American village to village concept, and basically there's 300 villages in the US that are self-sustainable. And without going into a lot of the details, really what we're trying to do is turn a piece of suburbia into a village with all of the characteristics of a village, the caring and so on. We do have funding. We've struggled a little bit of going from beyond the social side. We're gradually getting there. We're starting to look at the intergenerational aspects of it. It's really where we've looked at St. Albert and seen that they've got a wonderful social enterprise model. You know, it's trying to build that sense of community, because really we've lost that sense of community. How do we use social enterprise to not only make our whole approach self-sustainable, we'd obviously like to raise money as well to minimize the cost. I mean, we know that allowing seniors to age in place is cheaper from every standpoint. You know, we can get, hopefully if we can have medical support, all the other things, the ride shares, the helping with chores and so on, is desirable from every standpoint. But how does social enterprise help us? I will say that the Haskell Business School actually gave a very good review of what we wanted to do and gave us top marks for it, but it's getting to that next stage. So not really a question, but any thoughts would be appreciated.
I've actually just had conversations with 2 different groups that are starting to work towards those kinds of projects about financing them. And most of our investments are loans. So that's usually a little less interesting to people than grants. But I have done finance. I mean, I think it's a thing that social finance intermediaries have to do, is to think outside the box about what we're willing to finance. And I know my traditional banker friends think that I'm insane because I do stuff that, you know, they can't touch. But I think that if it's a good sound model and if a group is working on it, that there are ways that social finance can actually be used to help you even at the I mean, hands down at the building level, that's not a thing at all. But the scariest part is what I think of as the valley of death, which is where you're trying to build the model to get there, the whole development phase. And it can be pretty costly. So we've invested in a couple of things that are along those lines and are looking at more of them, because I think you know, we hear a lot about housing challenges in the country. I think that we need to support community members who are trying to solve that problem for themselves. So good for you.
Well, even in fact, checking with one of the biggest villages in the US, I asked for the median member that they had, it was an 83-year-old widow. So that in a way was coming up to 84 myself. That was like a wake-up call. But it's really trying to persuade government that to allow people to age in place is the right thing. Maybe to rethink how we're using our housing, maybe 4 or 5 people home sharing. Hopefully some common sense on reverse mortgaging. Maybe there's got to be another option to reverse mortgaging because most of us don't trust that.
Well, to some extent, I think the challenge is to social finance organizations to come up with solutions and not wait for government to figure out how to use money differently within our communities to get this stuff done. I'm so tired of trying to sort out what government wants to do on housing. So we just do stuff and say, see, you can do it.
No, well, I like that. I mean, it's the crazy thing is if a senior goes out on an icy street and has a serious injury, the city of Calgary doesn't pay the medical costs. We never kind of work out who pays for any of the challenges that seniors face. So, yeah, no, I don't disagree. I think if we can do it on a total social enterprise level, I think that's what we'd love to do. Thank you.
Barry, can I just offer one thought to echo something Dan said earlier? What are the things that you can learn from those models in the US and how do they apply locally? I think that's one thing just to add into here. And I'm sure you're already doing it. And I know the MBAs will have done that as well. To inform your model, where are the social enterprise opportunities that those folks have already undertaken? But the actual comment I wanted to make was that to Jane's point, there are a lot of folks interested in this space right now. I myself have also met with about 3 different social entrepreneurs interested in different angles of the co-housing space. We're going through due diligence on a tech play right now that's trying to achieve something similar. And I see a lot of committees for aging in place kind of top down at the foundation level, at the city level. But I wonder what a grassroots bottom up sort of coalition of innovators look like in this space. And if you're interested in something like that, I bet Jane and I would be super open to connecting you to some of those innovators that we know of who are having this conversation, because it's not going to be solved by one intervention alone.
No, we'd love the connections because that's one of the challenges. We're probably one of the first in Canada to try and do this. And we just puzzle why we haven't been more successful.
Yeah, and I think that piece of like I've heard from a number of groups too that are really exploring this issue, and this is something that you see in the UK and in Europe, right? You do see some of these, there's like dementia villages and stuff like that. And so being able to learn from who's been there before, you mentioned the US groups, about how they've taken it. And maybe it's just that the government has been more supportive of those types of initiatives and that's how they've built it. But are there any examples of people who have kind of brought it up through the social enterprise field system would be super interesting to know.
Yeah. You mentioned the word dementia, and I'm quite involved in research on that side. The fact that 16% of our population by 2030 likely will have some level of dementia, and we're not turning up grads from the nursing school in Calgary who want to go into long-term care. So we've got a whole bunch of crises all happening at the same time. So sorry for the rant.
I think it's a great conversation. We're actually seeing a lot of projects for the program that you did with MBA students that are looking at aging in place. So maybe as you chat with Jordana and Jane about the other organizations, maybe I can add to that list as well.
Right, thank you.
Get maybe a community of practice started somehow.
Okay.
Thank you, Barry, for your question. Next, we go over to Jenna, please.
Hello, wanted to give a shout out to the Alberta Catalyzer as well. If anyone's considering it, it's amazing and it got us leaps and bounds ahead of where we were a couple months ago, so highly recommend. My question might be a bit simple, but I'm wondering about how you refine the metrics you use to define your social impact. We have a lot of qualitative data, but I'm trying to find ways that we can quantify that and then track it and measure it. So any suggestions would be really helpful.
Okay, I'm going to ask a question. Why? Because that'll and it's not facetious, it's because that will help answer how, like, why you want to count a thing and who it's for has a great deal to do with what is the sensible thing to count. That makes sense?
Yeah, it does.
Just to build on that,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of people look at impact, distinguish between prove or improve. So you're looking at your data so that you can prove to somebody that you're having the impact you want, or are you looking at that data to then inform you as to what you need to do to improve your journey? So distinguish between those two goals could also help kind of guide you on how you want to tweak your data.
Okay. And what if what you're working on is abstract and you just need a way to quantify, like, for example, working on youth mental health, measuring the impact of your technology on how it could improve their lives. It's going to take quite a long time. So,
I mean, it does go back to the why you're actually gathering the data and in what form that's useful for that end purpose. So some people want to understand how it affects public spending, so they go after looking for dollar numbers. That might not be what you're trying to gather. So it really comes down to thinking about why you're trying to find out that information and what you're going to do with it. And that'll help you do something that's then useful. My running joke, and forgive me if you've heard this before, is the question in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, you know, what's the meaning of the universe? And they feed it into the computer, and after many days, the computer spits out the answer, which is 42. Well, what good is that answer to anybody? So, so it's trying to figure out how or examining what your outcome is going, what, as Dan said, what you're trying to prove, what you're trying to improve, where is it that you need to go, and that will hopefully give you a way to get there. I will say something that hopefully will be encouraging, is that this is a dilemma that people working in this field are angsting over, around how to measure impact. What does measurement look like? Are ESG measurements really sufficient? Like, who's trying to get where and why? There's a lot of people in a lot of rooms trying to figure out this. And, you know, after 11 years, I'm still not sure we got any good ways to do it. So very much look about what who you're trying to convince of what, and where, if it's just about where you want to get to in the work that you're doing. I think that that's really probably the key of where to start.
I'll just offer a tactical add-on to that, because I think that I echo all of those things 100%. And I do want to say to Dan's point, I think there is sort of something that you sometimes have to measure to external stakeholders because they're asking it. And that's sometimes very different than what you're measuring to actually demonstrate you're doing the thing you want to be doing. We're finding that in our own work right now. We're going through a big impact measurement internal review. And it's frustrating to me sometimes the things that I have to report aren't exactly the things that measure how I do it well. That's okay. We're blending those two types of indicators together and then trying to come up with processes to collect both at the same time. Also then trying to communicate to the stakeholders, hey, this is what you want us to measure, but this is actually what we can control. And what we can control is the thing that we can directly take accountability for. The tactical piece that I want to add in the first question that kicked this all off, I do like theory of change as a first framework to start. I also like the common approaches as a way to think about moving through an impact measurement and management process. Then there are standard databases which may have useful or not useful indicators. GERS is one of them, the SDGs are the other. So there are these kind of standard places that are trying to streamline indicators, and they may or may not be useful for your team, especially if you're kind of in like well-being spaces. A lot of those databases will have indicators around those pieces. And then with, if all else fails, like plug for universities, but there are academic researchers who are incredibly passionate about this, and all of the PhD folks on this call who are wanting to look for those, not these folks on this call, but people who are wanting to look for practical ways to apply their research expertise and knowledge might be another place to connect. So I'm going to drop those frameworks into the chat in the order that I described them. And just know that we've spent hours, like probably borrowing on 100 hours, combing through these resources over the last year and a half, and are finding them limitedly useful and useful at the same time. And so I would say that it kind of depends on your bandwidth and time to be able to look at these standard things. But in addition to the things that Dan and Jane have already shared, people are thinking about this. And so there are places you can dig.
Yeah, and I just want to add, I think this goes back to sort of the first conversation we had at the very beginning about sort of what do you measure? And ultimately it comes down to you making the decision of what's important and what you think indicates movement on the mission that you have, right? And we talk a lot about like learning and testing and running experiments. And I think people are really quick to rush out and be like, I need to be able to count. Right? I need to be able to count, but what do those numbers actually mean? And that's like really important, is if you're trying to figure out what your measures are, make sure they mean something to moving your mission forward. And the other piece is learning from others. So Jordana just talked about researchers, right? Is if you're working sort of in this space around youth mental health, for example, what's happening in that space? What measures are being seen at the research level? But then the other thing is on the practical level, are there organizations who have this figured out? Are there organizations who have been doing this for 30 years and have been measuring something that you could learn from? And I think that sort of piece around friendly wise skeptics and somebody who can kind of call you on your assumptions, help you figure out what you should be looking for, what measures are working, learn from their journey is so key to that. And then ultimately at the end of the day, it's your journey and you have to own it and you have to decide what is going to get me to where I want to go and what information do I need to collect.
Okay. That was really helpful in affirming, because it can be a bit overwhelming determining exactly what to measure and where, and we don't want to waste any time. So thank you.
Thanks for the great question, Jenna. I'm glad that, to use your word, it was affirming and validating. So thank you for joining us today. Next we have Mina, please.
Hi, everyone. Dan, good to see you again. And Brittany, it's nice to meet you in person. Yeah. I'm with Canadian Artists Against Poverty, and we're a charitable organization. And what we do is we help out low-income artists and also just low-income Calgarians who have mental and physical disability. And we workshop art materials, business skills, in terms of art and stuff like that. So right now, because of the limited funding, because we all know that it's hard to get some funding now, and we just thought about putting together a fundraising arm, which is the hydro farm, and it's been running for about a year. We started last year. We did our feasibility study and all. So right now we're actually running, and it's a fundraising at this point. So it's still under Canadian Artists Against Poverty. And so our dilemma right now, right, is if there are other options or resources for funding to buy capital assets, and we have. In that regard, we have to move to a bigger space, right? But anyways, I would like to consult with Jane about other options, because I was thinking about doing some loans and stuff like that. But again, because we're new, I don't want to get into a debt, right?
Oh, okay. Well, I'm going to suggest we talk about debt, because debt's actually a useful tool.
I know.
Right? people like money shouldn't be scary. You need to understand it. You need to face it. But the tool that I have to offer you is debt. And we have many organizations that have used debt wisely, not for profits, buying themselves buildings. It's not for everybody, yes, and we would have to talk about it, but I'm going to urge people generally not to be terrified of debt. It's about how you work with the money. So yes, let's talk. Maybe I'll leave my answer there for now, as I'm kind of conscious of time.
Yeah.
We have more hands up, but please reach out, Jane at socialenterprisefund.ca, and let's talk about how you can use debt to make something happen in a positive way.
I'm just so excited because a lot of the business that I'm approaching are they really wanted to support our work, right? But it all boils down to prices, right? So we have to compete with bigger suppliers and stuff like that. So yeah, we need help in
I mean, if
more capital assets. Yeah.
do you know the Nina Haggerty building here the Nina Haggerty Center is an organization that provides arts studios and training to disabled people. And we provided them with a loan to help stabilize the organization. So it can be done.
Oh, okay.
So we'll talk.
Oh, we'll talk. Yeah. Yeah. It's and the other question that I have is, because we're under the organization, should we move into a social enterprise? Should we separate, or not until everything is okay, that we are self-sustaining already? Would that be the right time to separate as a social enterprise?
I would suggest Brittany probably might want to take a look. Yeah.
So I actually want to talk on the first question, which was why I was unmuted. So that actually probably gets us into the legal realm, and the fact is that we're not lawyers. We're not the best people to talk to you about the best structure that makes sense for moving your mission. And so ultimately it's figuring out what form makes sense for the function that you want to have, right? So what makes sense that allows you to have that social impact that's key to you. So that's kind of what I can say for the legal piece. What I wanted to say is, I think your piece around, and Jordana already mentioned this, right? Social enterprises have to compete. And the reality is that as a social enterprise, you might have additional costs that your competition doesn't have. And you might be serving a population that's maybe working on a sliding scale or looks differently in terms of what they can pay. And I think the key here is really having a grasp on how the social and the entrepreneurial aspects of your business are coming together. And we have a tool called the Blender Canvas. And what it does is it really helps organizations understand, why are our customers here? Is traditional business a threat? And then also on the other piece is, how do we handle some of those additional costs that our social piece adds? And if it's a pressure point, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't move that idea forward, right? If you know this is a pressure point, it just means that you might have to get a bit more creative about how you're going to move that idea forward. And employment and training social enterprises are a great example of this, because if you're constantly, the goal is ultimately to train people to get them jobs outside of your organization, you're constantly getting new people, and it's expensive to train new people, right? And your competition might not have that. So there's a pressure point sometimes in those types of models, so that it's for you to be aware, this is a pressure point. Now, how am I going to deal with that pressure point, which is the key piece. So I'll link our Blender Canvas, but it might be something to start looking at those pressure points. And then in terms of legal structure, then figuring out what makes sense based on how we want to have impact, right? What makes sense in terms of how we're going to move our mission forward.
Okay. Thank you so much for your great question, and hopefully we'll get you some additional answers offline. I just want to make sure we have 2 raised hands, so at least we'll get to Darlington, please.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for the time. I just have 3 questions to ask. I will start from the third one because of time. Is there a barrier to, and I also want to give a shout out to Innovate Calgary, Platform Calgary, and Alberta Catalyzer. They've been supporting our project a lot. So is there a barrier to having social enterprise with international impact? That's my first question.
No. I mean, we have had social enterprises approach us that have varying levels of international impact. For our fund, we focus primarily on Alberta impact. But that doesn't mean that in time there aren't some of the things that we have done that will have influence, I think, around the world. I mean, it means by, what do you mean by a disadvantage? It's hard to run a business in other parts of the world. There's a whole nother level of challenges that you lay on yourself. So that's a really big question. But ultimately, there's no reason why the model can't work for international business.
I think just to add there, I think through all these conversations, it's very crucial to differentiate between social enterprise as like a concept. It's not a specific legal entity versus your legal status, i.e., are you a charity? Are you a for-profit? Are you a not-for-profit? Because that's where the issues of international status become very, very important. So it's less about whether you're a social enterprise or not. It's more about, are you a charity? Are you a for-profit, or are you not for profit when you're considering the implications of being international?
Yeah, I think a follow-up to that would be if the applications and the information on the applications are very clear on if projects with international impact are supported, like what Jane just said, that it's not part of their scope, but once in a while something spillovers to international waters. Well, thanks for that answer. My second question would be, where's the line between social impact and environmental impact? Because if you talk about CO2 emissions, that feels like environmental impact, but if you tweak it in a certain way, it's also a social impact. So that's my question.
We include environmental impact in some of the things that we finance. That's something that we're interested in. Different people have different definitions about what they include in the impact that they're interested in. So social impact is often thought around social causes. Mm-hmm. And it becomes a matter of definition. So often it's looking at who your partner is and what their definition of the term and their interest.
Okay, thank you. And then my last question is there a way we can find to help these social startups grow up to funding? So do you have any kind of mentorship where you've seen someone who's very close to getting your funding, but it's below the bar, and then you sort of mentor them instead of allowing them to go around in cycles and put in a lot of effort and get nothing out of it? Is there something you can do to mentor and lead them all the way from obscurity into the limelight?
I think all the different programs have maybe like specific coaching. At Assess, we have coaching for organizations where we work with them, but it's around our content and our tools. So it's not like we mentor you and tell you where to go. I think it depends on what your needs are. I think that the piece is, so if you're looking specifically to go into the funding track, is like for TRICO, we've kept sort of coaching and funding separate because there's some wonky power dynamics that can happen in that place. And so we kind of keep those pieces separate. But having said that, how we think about social enterprise is impacted by how we coach, right? So there's the pieces to come together. It really also depends on who you're looking to apply funding for. So for example, for TRICO, while we're able to work with organizations of sort of any legal designation in terms of training the mind and coaching and our tools, we're not able to fund every single type of organization and legal structure. Because we're a charitable organization, we fund charitable organizations. And so that can also impact who's kind of open to you. And the last piece is that oftentimes a conversation might help sort of, rather than spending a lot of time on an application, sometimes a conversation will help you when you talk to that funder specifically. So if you came to me and said, well, I'm a for-profit entity, I do have this cool social piece, but I'm working with in a different area than Alberta, you wouldn't fit our funding. And I could tell you that in 2 seconds, right? And we've also designed it so that we have a thing called an idea submission. So it's actually just a few questions an organization can answer, which will give us a gauge of whether you fit before you do a full application process. Because I don't think anybody here on this panel wants to waste anybody's time, especially when you're working on these great social things. Your focus should be on the work that you're doing, not necessarily wasting your time applying for things that don't fit just because of our mandates.
In 30 seconds or less, I would also like to plug a sort of systems level view. So you've got a number of funders on the call, and all of us are interested in making sure that people who have energy for entrepreneurship, which is a hard thing, get support along that journey. So there is a group called ABC that's been convening impact investors and social entrepreneur capacity building organizations to think about how we can make sure that folks who feel like they're slipping through the cracks, Darlington, it sounds like that's maybe something you're poking at, get the support that they need. And so stay tuned, but just know that in particular, the way that UC Social Impact Fund is structured, we're equally as interested in the folks who are unsuccessful as the folks who are successful. And so we are actually actively reaching out to each applicant right now, one-to-one, to follow up around exactly what they need. Dan, unfortunately, Brittany, a lot of them are coming to assess, but there's a whole ecosystem that are trying to work together.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Darlington, for all your questions, and everyone in the audience still here. We appreciate you staying over time. We want to get to the last question, the last hand that's raised, and then we'll do a round of announcements. So, Mohammed, please ask your question.
Quickly, thank you so much. And it is 2 o'clock in Qatar, 2 a.m. So you can imagine the value you guys are driving in my life. Through TRICO and this whole POP is the first event where I attended, and I just became, I started loving you guys. So the whole conversation I really enjoyed, and this has really given me a lot of energy. And after the POP event, this 3 days workshop which I attended, sitting in Qatar for Calgary, it was just amazing for me. So my question is, I have established something called Foundation for Inter-Community Relation. Over the course of last 3, 4, 5 years of this decade, what I realized based on my study and my engagement, that there's a lot of trust deficit which has evolved and which is gradually increasing more and more between the communities. And that varies, at various levels between different type of communities. You can just name them and we see there is a distance increasing and the trust deficit is increasing. So I go back to the question, I really loved it. So you can look at me, something who wants to do, who has conceptualized the things, who is trying his best, but I don't have a mentorship. Somebody can help me out that how to take it forward from here. Though I'm sitting in Qatar, but how can I get in touch with the business school, the TRICO Foundation, the community, the ecosystem, all what you referred the last 1.5 hours, right? So I'm looking for a help, a mentor, a support, somebody who can guide me that, yes, there is a merit here, which I really strongly feel. And that's where I picked up as a pivot on purpose as an initiative for me. So that's my question, that how this community with whom I am in touch with for the last many months now, how can they help me here? even though I'm sitting quite far from you, but I have an aspiration. I really match what exactly you guys are trying to drive through, inviting people, speaking to them, guiding them, how you can help me out. So my simple question is, how can you help me?
So at Trico, Mohammed, we don't do mentorship, but we do have other supports. So in honor of you, I'm going to create this special thing of the POP attendee who then attends a maze at 2 a.m. in their jurisdiction. I have your email from POP. I'm going to email you and we're going to hook up and then we're going to have a deeper conversation as to how we can help you.
Thank you so much, Dan. So nice of you. And thank you so much, everyone. It was really a pleasure attending this whole session. Thank you so much. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. Thank you for coming. It's great to know that this is happening and Dan's the best one for you to hook up with.
No, but I'll do my best.
Thank you.
Such a lovely sentiment to end our session on today. Thank you for being here, all of you. I've learned so much and I hope you all have too. And I look forward to learning more April 19th when we do it all again. Before we close, before I say good evening, good night, sweet dreams, I will go around the panelists and ask for their updates. So Jordana, please.
So I popped it in the chat. The big one from us is that we have an application close date or intake close date for April 1st. So call out to social entrepreneurs who are looking for early stage investment, either primarily equity, but also loans, largely for nonprofits in that case. We also have a revenue-based model, but we can take that offline. So you see social impact, call for social entrepreneurs to apply if you feel that you're investment ready. As I said in the response to Darlington, we are equally as interested in hearing from you and starting to kind of move you into this system of support. So almost no soon is too soon to apply. And then for all of the folks who are leading nonprofits or charities on the call, we will have a special invitation for nonprofit and charity leaders on our June 24th intake. So hope to hear from you folks and to connect. And then I will just add, there are other funders on this call, and we're always wanting to connect with those folks and make sure that if it's not us, maybe it's Jane, maybe it's Calgary Foundation. There's lots of folks to connect with and lots of places to get capital.
Let's do Brittany, then Jane, and then Dan. So Brittany.
I think just sort of building off that place of looking to support organizations. So we have our assess tools on our website. There is an application for coaching. We do take a limited number of coaching organizations. So that's just one thing to flag. And then on the other end, we also have our assess funding is open, and that's really meant for charitable organizations. I talked about this a little bit earlier, charitable organizations that have an idea of what their next step is, what they need to learn on their journey, and are looking to run an experiment. So that is open as well and is available on our website.
Thank you. Jane, over to you.
We don't have deadlines, so we're always looking for clients. So if you've got something to send or want to talk, let me know. I am going to do a bit of a commercial. The National Organization of Impact Investment Practitioners is looking for a new executive director. So this is a job alert part of the program. Go and look at their website at tiip.ca, tip.ca. And this person can be anywhere in Canada. So sorry, Mohammed, not you, but any place else in Canada. If you know someone who is looking for a contract gig that they want to do from home, really interesting point in this new organization's growth. So hope that if you're not interested yourself, you know someone else who might be.
No announcements for me.
And I guess a reminder, everyone, April 19th, check your inbox to register or tell your friends who might want to learn something from us or learn about some resources. We'd be delighted to meet them all. So thank you again for being here this evening. And
I guess,
overnight-
sorry, Alia, I
Yes,
would
go
just jump
ahead.
in. I feel horrible if anybody's like sat through this and didn't get to a question they have. So if you could send to Alia, we'll do our best to see that it does get answered, because we value your time and really appreciate that you were here.
Great point. Thank you. And with that, au revoir. Bye.